So next we're going to move on to the Dataverse for Teams, the core part of our session today. So what is it? It was introduced earlier this year, right around the time of Ignite, back in September, and it provides you with a place that you can do low-code development right within Microsoft Teams. So you can build Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents, even Power Automate Flows within Teams in this great low-code experience without having to leave that Teams environment. There's also a table designer there as well. So they've created this unique experience to be able to create tables within the Dataverse to store your data within. So all of this capability comes to us via the Microsoft Dataverse. Microsoft Teams has a very different, or I should say a different flavor of the Dataverse. The Dataverse for Teams is not a full-featured Power Platform environment. You have limited capabilities there, but that is really what makes this available under the licensing that Microsoft is providing us with. So to talk a little bit more about this, I think it's important to mention the licensing. So as you consider building solutions within your organization, that long-term cost of ownership around licensing is always an important consideration. So let's see what we get with, or how we can access this Dataverse for Teams. It comes with typically your E-Class licensing. So if you already have licensing that's allowing you to work with Teams and Office 365, likely you'll be covered for this capability. So an important thing to note is that if you would like to build a standalone Power App or automation or bot via the Power Apps Makers portal or the Power Automate portal, you cannot connect to Teams data or the Dataverse for Teams with those apps. You'll need to actually promote your Dataverse for Teams environment up to a full-fledged MS Power Platform environment or Dataverse environment to do that with. So that's a little bit of a limitation that we see here as we deploy these environments, and we'll see more about how these environments for Teams get created as we work through the session today. Another important point to mention here is there's no direct API access available for Dataverse for Teams. So you're not going to be able to access that data directly via API as you would with a full-fledged Dataverse environment. So that's another difference. So you can see that Microsoft has limited some of the capabilities with these environments. However, the win there really is that you can now build these low-code solutions, leverage some of the great parts of the Dataverse using your E-Class licensing. Another important point to mention here is Dataverse for Teams apps may only be run within Microsoft Teams, the official client, or the Teams mobile app. So those are a few other very important points I think to note. You can't expect to run these through the typical Power Apps player on your mobile device. You need to run them within Teams. This is a really nice feature though. The last point that I have to cover here is you can actually invite guests to interact with these apps and automations. So guests or guest access within Microsoft Teams is a great capability for collaborating with folks. And they actually will be able to access these apps, but they may not become owners or edit the apps. So that's an important distinction, but nice that you can actually build apps that other people, guests, your organization can interact with. So let's talk about getting started. What you'll be doing, or what you'll find yourself starting off with here, is you need to actually add the app to Microsoft Teams. And what you'll find within the Teams experience is in your left navigation, there's a little ellipsis you can click on. It will allow you to add new apps into Teams. From there, you can search for Power Apps, and it's going to bring up the Power Apps home screen for that particular app. All you need to do is click on Add, and then it's going to bring you, after it's installed, into this experience that we see here. Now in our left navigation, you'll notice that we actually have this Power Apps icon that we can access this environment with, right from within Teams. It's pretty nice. So what happens when we create an app? This is a really important part of the process, because not only are you getting your Dataverse for Teams app, you're also getting an environment for that app to live within. So let's talk a little bit about what happens through this process. So you can see that we've chosen to create a new app. I'm going to show you how this happens in a demonstration in just a minute. But the first time that you add an app into a team, something happens. So you get this message that says, give us a minute. So some things are going on in the background. And what's happening is that a Dataverse for Teams environment is being deployed into your tenant. So back in the Power Platform Admin Center, I've highlighted this entry that we can see. So the team that we were creating this app for was called Fidelity Widgets. That's the name of the team back in Teams. And you'll notice that this environment in the Power Platform is being created. It's currently under this preparing instance state. So as you add an app to a team, this happens. So a Dataverse for Teams environment is automatically deployed for you. So this is totally happening behind the scenes. No really need for an end user within your organization to really have to worry too much about this. But as an owner or an administrator, this is something to be aware of. Notice that we have a distinction here on the type of team. We have a Microsoft Teams environment as opposed to the other types of environments that are out there. So something to be aware of. So the note, I think the important takeaway really there is that a Dataverse for Teams environment is created for every team as soon as you deploy an app or a bot or a Power Automate flow into that team, into the Dataverse for Teams. So that's kind of a part of the deployment that happens. We're going to talk a little bit more about the importance of these environments and managing them appropriately as we work through this presentation as well. So what you find next after you get through that deployment process is you get brought into the designer. Right within Microsoft Teams, we have something that looks an awful lot like the classic Canvas apps designer that you would see if you were working in the regular Stream app. So if you're back in the Power Apps Makers portal, you see something very similar to this in your Canvas apps designer. In the Dataverse for Teams, it's just embedded right within the main panel of Teams. We still see the Teams left navigation over here. I'm going to walk you through this in just a minute. But before we do that, let's chat a little bit about the designer and some of the differences that I wanted to highlight. So as I said, this is embedded right within Microsoft Teams. And you'll notice that the very top navigation is different here. So the top navigation that you normally have within the Canvas Apps Designer, within the Power Apps Makers portal, provides you with a different set of options. There's a Home tab, there's an Insert tab, there's a number of different tabs up there. Those are all gone. However, you can still access all that functionality for the most part using the left navigation. So that provides you with a way of getting into those features that previously were revealed there. So what you find here, though, is Home, Build, and About. The home screen is going to take you back to the home part of the Power Apps environment. The build screen is kind of where you can kick off the creation of new components for your Dataverse for Teams. The About tab just gives you a little bit of information about the app itself. Right away, we also are presented with this Create New Table feature. So we can actually build a table that's going to be deployed into our Dataverse for Teams. So we'll get to see how nicely that works in just a minute. And they provide you with a template screen as well to connect up with that data. So a very out of the box, a nice experience to get started with for a low code app builder. A few other features over here that are notably different. The app checker has moved. So that typically was found over here on the right. That's now over here, more on the left-hand side. And we have save, preview, and publish to teams. So these are all experiences that are slightly different. I guess the save in this case is going to save the app just like it would normally back to your Dataverse for Teams. The preview functionality works very similarly to what you would have with the preview in the normal designer. And then the publish to Teams is a different experience altogether for getting your app embedded into Teams. And we'll see how that works in a few minutes as well. So those are a few of the differences you'll find when you get working with the designer. And this is that table creator for the Dataverse for Teams. So you can actually design a table to capture data right within this experience as well. So you don't have to go anywhere to create a place that you can actually store your data within. So we have this entity we're designing. You can see that you've got the ability to create columns of different data types and all that great stuff. So I'm going to provide you with a little walkthrough now of that experience. So I'm navigating over to the Power Apps app in the left navigation. And I'm just going to change this presentation mode here, if you can bear with me for just a minute so that you can get a better look at this whole screen. There we go. Right, so I've just clicked on this app that's been installed into our Teams. It brings us into this Power Apps experience within Teams. So this is the home page that I was talking about, is kind of your home base that you can get started with. So you can see some of the recent apps that you've created. Here's one that I created earlier, and you can also add in some stock apps. So Microsoft, as usual, has provided us with these great templates. So kind of a theme there. I think they do a great job with these templates, and these are no exception. Definitely a good place for you to see some of the cool capabilities you can access within the Dataverse for Teams. You can build a new app from scratch here. And then let's go over to the build screen. So this gives us a little bit of a deeper dive into everything that we've got in our Dataverse for Teams environment. So from the My First Dataverse app that I created an entity. A table, I should say, previously known as an entity. So that was a project table. I also referenced a table that is part of the Dataverse stock set of tables called user. So I wanted to be able to allow someone to pick a user for a project manager. And because I referenced it, even though it's a stock table, it includes that. The application user is also another stock table there. But if we click on See All here, it's going to take us a layer even deeper into the Dataverse for Teams. And what we see when this screen loads is a more complete view of everything that's hosted within that Dataverse environment. So the All gives us a little bit more of a detailed view. We can see some of the internal names that have been assigned to these resources within the Dataverse. And then we can look at everything on a component by component basis. So we have Canvas apps, chatbots if we've deployed them, Power Automate flows, and tables as well. So these are all within the scope of our Fidelity Widgets environment. So that's the environment that was deployed for this team when we created our first app. So we have a couple of entities here. This is the project entity. I can actually go in and start editing this entity, this table, I should say, from here. So I can add fields, etc. So this is one place you can come back to as you start to collect components as part of your Dataverse for Teams. You can see everything from here, interact, edit, further develop them from this experience. What we'll do now is actually create an app from scratch. The first thing that we're asked for is which team would we like to deploy this app into? So we're going to go back to that Fidelity Widgets team. And this was the one that I took the screenshots from the earlier presentation. I was talking about how when you create an app for the first time, or for a team, a Dataverse for Teams is created for that team. So this is the point that normally would happen. We've already done it, that work has been done, and it doesn't have to be repeated. This new app that we're creating is going to be deployed into that Dataverse for Teams environment. So it's getting some things ready for us, and soon we're going to be able to actually start building our app. So you'll notice that I'm actually running this through the browser. So you have the ability to do this work within the browser-based versions of Teams or the full client experience if you prefer. So let's give this app a name, call it the project tracker. So it's taking care of saving that app for us. And we see before us the default experience that we come into when we create a new app. So you'll notice this is slightly different than when you create an app from scratch in the Power Apps Makers portal. In the main design canvas area, we have a ready to go framework that we can leverage. So very nice and an easy way for us to get started with something. And we also have the ability to create a new table. So I already have a project's entity, so I'm going to have to come up with a unique name here, but we're going to be tracking projects. I'll just call this project master list. Not an ideal name for a table, obviously, but I've already used up the project name. You'll notice that there's a plural name, table name you can assign if you want as well. So I may want to adjust that if I need to, just to make things clear. So at this point, it's creating that table for us back in the Dataverse. We're going to see it populate in the left navigation there, but we can also go about adding and editing some columns into this as well. So let's see what this experience looks like. We have a default name column that's there for the name of the project. We'll leave that just how it is. The next thing we'll do is include a budget field. So we'll just capture this as a number. You can customize these values a little bit as well. We don't really want a budget below 0. That would be weird. And we can put a cap on that budget as well. So we'll make this a choice field, and we can actually populate the choices. So you get the idea here. We have the ability to create this nice choice list. So we could go on and add in as many fields that we needed to properly reflect all the data that we need to capture with a project. But I think that's good enough for now. So pretty nice we're able to do all this right from within the Teams experience, out of the box. We've been able to create this nice table to store data within, and you'll notice what's happened in the UI here is that it's automatically wired up that new entity to this framework app that we see before us here. So we could actually preview this now and run it. So if I wanted to create a new record, I can click on that. Let's provide some information about this particular project. So we'll call this a sales tracking tool. And the budget for this, we'll say the status is not started. So I think Microsoft has done a really nice job here of creating an experience that will springboard someone into the creation of an app. So let's put in one more entry and we'll talk a little bit about the way this stock experience looks and works. So we'll put in one more project. We have a time tracker we're going to create as well. Say that this one's in progress. So we can look at this listing of all the data that's contained within that table we just created right here. So along the left navigation, we can select these, and the pane on the right is really the detail view for that particular item. So we can go about editing these if we want to change some of the details or perhaps update a status. It's a very nice interaction there, very simple to work with. We can close down the preview and to further extend the app. This would be very similar to what you would do in any Canvas app. So let's say we wanted to adjust some of the look and feel or change some of the information that's being displayed. So it's nice to have this budget here, but I might just kind of tweak this a little bit. I'd rather have the status shown first. So let's move over our budget label and change this expression. So that looks a little bit nicer. And I'm just going to copy and paste this label control, and it automatically put that back into our gallery that all this information is being displayed within. Why don't I open up the tree view here so you can kind of see how this is all reflected. Those containers that I talked about being released are being used here. So these apps are going to be responsive by nature out of the box. So that's pretty cool. And we are working in our left container. I just added in this extra label And in this case, I want to just show what the current status is. So we get all these fields that are part of our table that we've created. I'm trying to remember if I think I called that current status or something like that. There it is. So that's appearing for us. It looks pretty good to me. So you can see how easy it is for someone to get started actually building an app with low code right within the Teams experience. So just to recap everything that we've done here, we've created a brand new app from scratch, added an entity into it for tracking project information with, and then done a little bit of light customization there. You could really take this as far as you want. So obviously we can save this. It's going to make sure all the work is being saved back into the Dataverse. We saw how the preview worked, but let's talk about the publishing to Teams capability. So if we click on this ellipsis, we could manage the pins, which is something separate altogether. But if we choose to publish to Teams, it's going to walk us through the process of deploying this app we've just created into Teams. So if we click on next, it's going to ask us where we would like to actually deploy this. So because we linked this to a specific team, the app was deployed into that team's Dataverse environment. So we're being presented with all the channels within that particular team. This team only has one channel. And if we click on this little plus sign on that channel, we can choose to deploy it here. And what's going to happen is it's going to actually add a tab into this channel for us and deploy our app into there. So we save and close. That's kind of taking care of finishing off this part of the process. And let's have a look back in Teams at what's happened. So there's our project tracker tab. And now right within the Teams experience, we have deployed this great app that we just created in about 5 minutes. And there we go. So just like we left it, we've got our app embedded as a tab right within Microsoft Teams. So that's a pretty quick run through of a bunch of the, I think, important parts of what you get with the Dataverse for Teams, specifically around the Canvas apps experience. So there's a lot there, and you have a lot of capability there. And I think that leads us into the next part of the session that I wanted to talk about. So with a tool such as the one that we just saw, we are putting a lot of power into the hands of the folks that can create teams, or sorry, create apps and teams, I guess. But being able to create and deploy these Dataverse for Teams environments is something that I think you're going to want to monitor, administer. So we think about our enterprise standards for applications that are being deployed. I wouldn't create an exception for this. You need to manage and monitor these the same way. So let's talk a little bit about what capabilities there are to make sure that these are all being tracked properly. The first thing that I would say is you can leverage the COE. So there are some capabilities specific to the Dataverse for Teams that are being released for the COE. So the COE, if you aren't familiar with it, is the Power Platform Center of Excellence. So Microsoft has created this starter kit that you can download and deploy into your Power Platform tenant, and it's going to provide you with a bunch of key capabilities. So it's going to allow you to administer, monitor, and nurture everything that's happening within your Power Platform environment. So with this comes a great Power BI tool set to give you insight, a whole bunch of tools that you can use so that you can really fit the process you want to follow to manage all these tools with, and then a bunch of other capabilities for managing and administering. So that's a little bit about the Center of Excellence itself. So that's what I'm talking about on this particular side when the title says leverage the COE. You want to leverage that tool. And if you'd like more information on that, let us know. It's a vital part, I think, for enterprise deployments of success. You want to make sure that you understand what's happening out there with this tool. Anyhow, enough said about the COE, but there isn't an environment justification feature that is part of the Center of Excellence. So when an environment is created, such as a Dataverse for Teams environment that we've been talking about, you can automate the collection of business justification. So we see over on the left-hand side of this slide, we're asking the individual that created the environment to justify why they need it. This in turn would be fed back into a app that's included within the Center of Excellence. So we can look at the justification and evaluate it. Are we going to approve or reject this? Is this a just use of our corporate resources? You can decide that. Maybe you want to automate it as well, and I think this is a feature you can leverage within the COE, that if a justification isn't provided, that environment might just be removed. So you have tools like this to make sure that you're tracking the engagement people are taking and that there's proper justification around it. You can also leverage the data loss prevention playground. So you can see the slide that we're showing here gives you a look at what the data loss prevention playground within the Center of Excellence provides you with. So you can plan out your policies here and then see the actual effects that these policies are going to have on apps that are out there already. So this is a very important part of planning what can happen with the connectors within the Power Platform. So for example, you may want to create a policy that specifies specific business data connectors and others that are non-business data. And then you can create rules around where these connectors may be mixed and matched within a particular environment. So you can create rules that will really put up guardrails so that people don't do things that you wouldn't want with your corporate data. For example, you wouldn't want a SQL connector, perhaps used within the same app or deployed within an app that the Facebook connector or Twitter connector is deployed within. So you create these boundaries, and you can actually create policies specifically for the Dataverse for Teams. You could create a blanket policy or a specific policy that gets applied to the Dataverse for Teams. And this is going to perhaps limit the connectors that someone could use so they don't get to deploying premium connectors, for example, which would have additional licensing costs on that solution. So you can set up the users of the Dataverse for Teams for success with these DLP policies that you can deploy. Another important consideration here is that there is a certain amount of database capacity deployed with each Dataverse for Teams environment. So you have 2 gigabytes of storage per Dataverse for Teams environment that's deployed. What I should mention is this is totally separate capacity from the general capacity you get with the Dataverse for Teams. So that comes from the other licensing that you buy for your Power Platform tenant. So you get 2 gigs of storage per environment, and you're going to want to watch this and monitor it. So if someone is collecting a lot of information within the apps and automations or bots that are deployed into a Dataverse for Teams environment, that could eat up that capacity, and then it's going to limit what can happen with that particular Dataverse for Teams area. So another tool for you to leverage to monitor and track what's happening out there. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of monitoring and administration. Within the Center of Excellence, there are a lot of tools. The Power BI reporting would be something else that I think could be very useful. You'll be able to see all the apps that are being created within the Dataverse for Teams environments and truly understand what's happening out there with the deployment. So that concludes the core part of the session.